Good afternoon, good morning, and welcome. I'm very pleased to be joined by Jean Paquin. Jean is the head of the SAF Consortium based in Canada. So welcome, Jean.
Thank you. Welcome.
So yeah, you have a very long history and background, specifically in wind power and renewables. You were in one of the big project developers, Northland Power, I seem to recall. Now you've been following that with advisory and work around carbon, and for the last 4.5 years been working on SAF and specifically on a synthetic route. So yeah, an impressive biography. Can you give us a little bit of a background to how you come into SAF and specifically why? 4.5 years is some tenure. And the markets are just beginning to get going, as it were. So yeah, please give us a little thumbnail biography yourself.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nadine. Well, very simply, we as an engineer, a hydro engineer to start with, I quickly got involved with utilities and got involved with the world of renewables, and quickly switched to wind and solar, as you mentioned at the beginning. For many years, and did many projects around the world in Southeast Asia, in the Middle East, in South America, in North America, with different companies on the consulting side and on also the project side. So that really helps because you really get a two-sided vision of the need and of the market, renewable and energy decarbonization need worldwide. And quickly, through the consulting work that we were doing as expertise as climate experts, and I founded a company back in 2015 on the expertise of climate change and climate work. And that consulting business led me to assess different technologies. And we quickly had mandates on assessing up to 150, close to even 200 technologies on carbon CO2 utilization, CO2 capture, and then that CCUS, that famous CCUS, which ultimately is more on the CCS side, but keeps on forgetting what we can do with that capture, apart from actually injecting it in the ground or in pipes in another storage area. There's actually a use to the CO2, and we quickly saw different technologies ranging from carbon injections in cement and use in agriculture or in synthetic textile industry. And one of the very interesting story is the engineers that were working with us. A lot of them came from the aviation sector, and this is really good reason to that. Here in Montreal, we're the third hub in the world for aviation after Seattle, of course, with Boeing, and Toulouse with Airbus. Montreal is really well known for, it has ICAO here. It has a lot of Bombardier is also here. So it has a lot of background in aviation. All the supply chain, aviation supply chain and aerospace is done here from Montreal. And really it's very common to have engineers that have worked directly or indirectly on aviation project. And we had some of the engineers that were working on the project, working also at ICAO to support the CAPE groups and support some of the states in their assessment of how they could decarbonize and ultimately attain the what is the CORSIA requirement and suggestions on the LTAG. And as we were working together, we kind of got into that little momentum where engineering on the renewable side of use of CO2 and engineering knowledge on the aviation got together, and saw the opportunity when the government of Canada issued a mandate or issued a kind of federal funding on SAF, on sustainable aviation fuel pathway project, right? So they issued that back in 2018, and we got on board and said, well, we could use a very well-known technology called, of course, the Fischer-Tropsch route, which is a PTL pathway, and use that to present a project to the government of Canada. And let's see if we get selected. And we did get selected back then. I think it was 13 or 15 different contestants, and we got on board with 2 or 3 other participants with different pathways. Some of them were with FOGS or EFA, and some of them were with biomass, biomunicipal waste, etc. But we were the PTL route. And that really started our story on the pilot plant here in Montreal, demonstration plant that we did in a record time of 2.5 years, and we're talking about one of the largest plant, EE plant in the world right now, and it just got so much. With the consortium that was built around it, with all the other partners that were built around it, it got so much traction. Yeah, the government was behind us. The local industry was behind us because we were decarbonizing and helping the industry lower their footprint. We were also given an aviation supply chain a route towards a sustainable ecosystem of SAF. Yeah. And ultimately, we got to an amazing amount of people around the table, including Airbus, Pratt & Whitney, the airport managers, and some of the other aerospace consortium members, plus, like I said, maybe earlier on, and we're discussing with the team, the non-aviation related but needed industries that came on board and tied up with that alignment was just unbelievable from that point on. And here we are. We're just ahead of the curve. And this is when you look at when you have a crystal ball and you work with the big guys. This is what usually happens.
Yeah, and the facilities. So how much SAF are you able to produce at the moment? Where are you being able to expand capex and expand that plant? What are some of the sort of plans around? And also, what maybe for the people not familiar, could they describe the inputs into the plant? I believe you take CO2 capture from industry and yeah.
Well, there's a few questions in your question, so I'll go by part. From the technology perspective, we're talking about a capture of CO2 molecules. So from a point capture, you have different captures that exist around the world. You hear a lot about the direct air capture. You hear about those other industry backbone type capture that are redistributed and used. We're using directly from the chimney of a textile. From a chemical plant. The CO2 that comes out of the chimney, the effluent is used directly in a capture on site, and we mix. This is mixed with energy. Basically, that black box needs to have a what we call green hydrogen. So hydrogen that is produced using a clean, 100% clean green electron. So here in Quebec, we're fortunate enough to have a lot of alignment. Actually, I call it the alignments of the planets, where you have one of the most decarbonized energy in the world, with almost 100% green energy on our network, and one of the cheapest at about 2 cents of euros per kilowatt hour. And I always get a lot of people go, oh, God,
that's cheap.
Yeah, are you missing a zero?
I'm seeing in Italy here. This is too.
I know I was in the UK a little while back, just a week and a half back, and I said that to the crowd at Farnborough, and I love the feeling, because I get their big eyes going, are you really are you for real? Talk about that. Yeah, we are. This is the alignment that I'm talking about, and plus we have here right beside our site the point of injection for the distribution hub of the airport managers management system. So that really gives us an amazing alignment between green hydrogen, the production through, of course, the Fischer-Tropsch technology, CO2 capture, and all of that within 1.5 kilometers connected to the network for production. And that is distributed directly to, and that's what I love to say is, yes, we're working in hydrogen, but you won't need any infrastructure, hydrogen infrastructure, because we're using a drop-in SAF, of course, a drop-in kerosene SAF, that is blended before it's actually injected in the system. So you're using essentially conventional and existing infrastructure. Now, for the financing side, you asked for the financial of how this got into the way. Of course, we're producing very little quantity right now. The pilot is not economical. A pilot shouldn't be, I would say, but it's not economical. It's just very expensive to have every liter that comes out. Of course, this always aims at having, first, a de-risking of the project, and second, an alignment of a commercial play, right? And the commercial play is the one that's important. We're working towards now 100 million liters production, which is kind of normal in Fischer-Tropsch. We're talking about 2,000 barrels per day production. about 300,000 tons of CO2 capture. And that's really interesting because that's a big number. And that helps, like I said, the heavy industry, heavy emitters. And then that production should all be commercialized and in play by 2028. Now, the story for us right now is, of course, financing the risky part. And we're right at the edge of that, of what we call the financial investment decision.
Yeah.
So that's where we are right now. And that's where we have all the alignment necessary to get through that stage.
And in terms of that final investment decision, and you eloquently put it, going from pilot to this next stage, 2,000 barrels or the famous valley of death. So you have the new technologies. Admittedly, Fischer-Tropsch isn't new, but it's obviously putting it together in a new process is new. And so around the financing, who are the type of people who have the right appetite or are able to take that investment? They're not typically just your East Coast investment banks, are they? So
yeah, well, that's a really interesting question, Nadim, because it seems as if you've spoken to some of the organizers at the panel on the UK Farm Bureau, because they asked the same question. How do you finance this on a risky, let's say on a risky business, I like to call the risky business before FID is the risk. And it's like a reverse funnel, right? It becomes bigger amount of money, bigger amount of cash needed to de-risk that. And then people are reluctant to say, but one of the things that really helps, and I think this is the fundamental of the financial structure buildup that we're doing right now. One of the things that really helps is that not a lot of people today in the market underestimate or don't understand the future need and demand of SAF in the market. I think everybody agrees that I like to say, take the analogy of an Olympic pool. We're an Olympic pool size type of need, and we're filling it with glass of water right now. So ultimately, that is going to happen. And then you got on top of that ICAO that has signed 193 countries that have agreed to LTAG and long-term goals. And then you have ultimately 2 days or 3 days back, the European Community or European Commission signing on the refuel Fit for 55 and all the mandate. And then you say, well, and then you get, of course, that final alignment of net zero by most of the company and by 2050. And then you say, well, that's going to happen. Something's going to happen. I mean, it's not going to stay that way, especially if in Europe, I think you're at 0.5% SAF and we need to be at 2% in 2030. You look at the dates and you go, wow, how are we going to do that? Yeah. We're estimating about 4 to 5, maybe even more thousand plants of SAF in the world. And at $2 billion a pop, more or less, 1.5 billion euros, 2 billion Canadian, we're talking about substantial money here. The estimate is about $175 billion Canadian, I think, or US, I'm not too sure, a year until 2050 to get to those decarbonization goal in the industry. That includes, of course, other things, but these are substantial investment that we're talking about. So, of course, the market understands that an investment is going to be needed. What they don't understand is how to get there. Yeah. It's our role to de-risk it. And the way we de-risk it is we bring it to a detailed engineering by de-risking not only the market, but de-risking the technology. One of the advantages that we have, we're fortunate enough to work with a technology that has been on the market for over 90 years. It's called Fischer-Tropsch. It's been de-risked every day for the past 30, 40 years by the South African after apartheid.
Apartheid, yeah.
They're doing thousands of gallons on Fischer-Tropsch a day, and they've proven that this works. So here we go. Now this is how you got to work it. You got to work it through existing de-risking. And this is all an exercise of de-risking all the time. The funding prior to FID never comes through that. No bank is going to come in and say, oh, I'm so interested. This is great. Let me invest. Now, they're not going to do that. That comes after, and that doesn't look at your technology or your market as much as it looks for a return. Yeah. So that is one story. So you have to fill that gap. And we're talking about tens of millions of dollars before you get to FID, essentially something like 50, 60 million, euros before you get to FID. Well, you have to pay for it through federal provincial funding. So this is one part. Then you have to use private equity, and we're using this. But private equity has its limit. We're all really willingly thinking that this is going to happen, but we have limitation in terms of what we can put in equity. And then the third one is, and this is really important, it's partners. Partners have come in and they're putting equity in the project. So they're paradigm shifting their way of investing to invest in a project that's for them risky, but not from a market perspective, more from a technology or more from an application or a reality perspective. And this is how we've been working it out for the past 4 years.
Yeah. So that's, specifically some of the large balance sheets of strategic partners who have an interest in being a player in the future industries. It's interesting. I was going to ask you about the RefuelEU to see whether the news had already traveled across the Atlantic, and clearly,
it traveled immediately.
Yeah, I
don't know if that's good. I don't know if that's good sometimes.
I'm assuming there's a lot of happiness around the specificity of the regulation, and specifically, obviously, not just the bio component, but that real. I think, from 0.5% to 2% in 2030 to 2035 of the syn kerosene product. So I guess from a Canadian perspective, how does that European regulation help you? And what do you see as the limits? You mentioned earlier before we started recording, around carrots and sticks. So maybe unpick some of that area and what legislation can do to help you get scale up and to a commercial FID.
That's an interesting question, and I don't know if I know the full answer to that. Not because I don't know the story, I do, but I'm not sure, because I still have to marinate that a little bit and see how we could use it to our advantage. And one of the obvious advantage I see is it's easy for me now to go to the federal government or go to local provincial government or other governments in other jurisdictions to say, listen, guys, these guys need to decarbonate. Look at the way they used it. They put a mandate on the table, an obligation for the market to do so. So guess what? Projects like ours are going to happen there because they're specifically saying, I'll need your produce. I'll need your production, right?
Yeah.
But on the other end, especially for the Canadian government, it might force them to say, okay, let me subsidize or give you subsidize the market for you, so that you don't go away, you don't run away, and then you have enough to be on the same on a level playing field, right? But I think it goes beyond the mandate. It goes beyond the obligation. It needs to be within a vision of the economic downfall or perspective of sustainability of the economy as well. You get a country like Canada, who is aviation prone, like Quebec is really aviation prone, with Montreal being at the center of that aviation hub I was talking earlier about. The government needs to not only align with the specific need of the market, but needs to understand that if it doesn't get on the bandwagon now, it's just going to be at the mercy of other projects that are going to be, producing otherwhere in other parts of the world. And right now, specifically, and this is one of the advantages of working with a consortium of great players like Pratt & Whitney. Pratt & Whitney has to go all the way to the States, California, to buy all its SAF for its testing and its designing, and it's costing them a fortune. But let alone that they can get a hand on it, it's difficult to get a hand on it, because then guess what? Other really important companies like the United, Delta of this world are actually taking all the production and already have secured their position in the market. So, like I say, you can put a mandate as much as you want, but if you don't align your policy and don't understand and put a priority to projects like that, you're just going to wind up on that list, and you're going to be at the bottom of the list. You're going to pay a high price, and you're not going to have access to it as easily and control over your energy. When we say control over energy, and this is what people need to understand, this is an energy call. This is power to liquid. It's just in a liquid form in a plane, but it's still an energy play. So if any country, and this is well known by anyone in the world, any country that does not have control over its energy has a problem and should put that as a focus of attention. And that's why it comes back to an energy play.
Yeah, excellent. That's very well put, in terms of, the strategic reason, or that governments should be helping subsidize and fuel this energy transition. And when you look back at previous energy transitions, famously Churchill put BP was originally called Anglo-Persian and created to supply the Royal Navy with fuel so the Royal Navy could change from coal to oil-powered battleships. And we've seen that time and time again with every sort of piece of the energy transition. Governments have got to play, and they've got to be able to see that far ahead across the generation, or across the transition. In terms of the legislation in Canada specifically, there's legislation due. Is it going to be sector specific? Is it going to be more like the US model in terms of flat subsidy, or more like a mandate? I mean, or a blend of the both, which probably is the optimal.
Yeah, it's a complicated story, because you have the industry. I look at airlines, for instance, that are saying, well, that's not my problem. You should be, as a government, taking care of that and just subsidizing it. Have a mandate, or just call for a contract system that will allow me to have access to cheap kerosene and guarantee the economy. That's your economy after all, etc. That's one way of looking at it. I like to be more on the entrepreneurial business side and say, well, you might wait for things to happen, but if you do, you run a risk of winding up at the end of the line. I mean, yes, you're going to have your piece of the cake, but it might not be the one with the foamy colors and the good sweet cherry on top. And that's really, I think, a fundamental that we're trying to convey in the market. When I look at Canada, they usually ultimately follow what the states are doing, of course, because of the alliance. And you have to think, 70% or so, my figures might not be right, but more or less of exchange, import, export is across the border, right? We got a large partner that really pulls a lot of our economy. So likelihood of having more of a mandate imposed as opposed to a subsidy and follow on the states, just the budget in the state is always 10 times the budgets that we have here. So they put, I think it was 400 and some odd $billion on the table. We're putting maybe 60, 70, 80 billion. You can see there's a definite difference because of the size, but the alignment of the philosophy is the same. And I think it's mostly going to go around that level playing field on the energy side. But we are working very hard to help the government understand that if they can secure also production for the industry, it's a small industry. Aviation, even though we have an aviation hub, from an aviation economy, Canada is not the largest country from an aviation perspective. I mean, you have larger countries that are way smaller geographically. But what's really important is that if they put that mandate or have that contract for difference, let's call it this way, well, that might help the industry to be supportive and tied with a subsidy. And comes back to what I was saying at the beginning, having a kind of a stick and carrot approach that might be one of the solution for Canada. So I think Canada, and I say that with knowledge, is actually moving very fast in the infrastructure / decarbonization or capture and carbon position in the weeks to come. So this is not even in the months to come. This is about to come. There's going to be what we call a funding possibility or potential for pre-FID non-infrastructure project. And that's really important for the ecosystem or the new technology to be put forward. So there's a mix of that. Help the economy, help the industry, support through a subsidy, but also think maybe about having some sort of light mandate to be able to answer that first decade of assessment and settling of the new paradigm shift.
Excellent. Well, thanks a lot for explaining that. Certainly giving us a really good picture of your perspective and what's happening there. It's certainly exciting times for the SAF industry, and hopefully beginning to get into the steep part of the development cycle or maturity cycle. So you're going to be speaking, as you said, 7th to the 9th of June next month in Amsterdam at the SAF Congress, which our European edition before our North American edition, which is later this year. So we really look forward to you coming across and making some great connections and helping to accelerate, the SAF industry. So many thanks, Jean.
I'm looking forward to it. Many thanks to you, Nadine. It's been a pleasure. And I'm always available for any comments.
Excellent. Many thanks. Take care.
Good care.
Cheers.